Hello, and welcome to the Clock of Darkness, your channel for inexplicable stories. Today, we have a spine-chilling tale that will make you question what is real and what lurks in the shadows. Imagine embarking on a dream adventure only to end up in the midst of an unimaginable nightmare. This is the story of Ahmed, a young Iraqi who, in search of experiencing a new culture, found himself trapped in a sinister web of cannibalism and horror deep within Mexico. Since I was a child, I had a recurring dream, walking through the colorful streets of Mexico, feeling the rhythm of its music, and losing myself in the richness of its culture. The stories I heard and the films I watched fueled my fascination with this country. When I finally got an opportunity for an exchange program, my excitement was uncontrollable. I couldn't wait to experience everything I had imagined for so long. Upon arriving in Mexico, I was mesmerized by the lush landscape and the vibrant architecture that adorned every corner. The vivid colors of the houses and the artistic murals reflected the energy and history of the Mexican people. However, as I ventured further into the streets, reality began to reveal its darker side. The initial exuberance gave way to narrow streets and dark alleys where shadows seemed to swallow any ray of light. As the day progressed and the sunlight diminished, the city revealed a less inviting side. The festive atmosphere gave way to an oppressive and heavy environment. The shadows lengthened, creating unsettling shapes on the old walls and narrow alleys. The feeling of excitement was gradually replaced by a growing discomfort, as if an invisible presence was watching me closely. The reality of Mexico was about to become much darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. Looking for a place to stay, I came across a hotel that seemed lost in time. Unlike the modern university town I had expected, this place was old and decayed, with a worn facade and dusty windows. With no other options in sight, I decided to stay there, trying to ignore the unease I felt when looking at the building. The reception area was nearly empty, with only a dim light illuminating the space, amplifying the sense of abandonment. The interior of the hotel was no different. Walking through the poorly lit hallways, the smell of mold was almost unbearable, and the peeling walls seemed to tell stories of better days. The floor creaked with every step, echoing through the disturbing silence that dominated the place. Despite all the discomfort, I decided I could endure one night there, convincing myself that the exchange adventure was still intact. My room was small and gloomy, with an old bed and dusty furniture. The window offered a view of a desolate inner courtyard, where only the wind seemed to move. I tried to settle in and put aside the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the sensation that there was more to this hotel than met the eye. Every noise seemed amplified, and every shadow seemed to hide secrets I preferred not to uncover. From the moment I entered the hotel, something felt off. The walls were covered in mold, creating dark patterns that resembled sinister faces and figures. The hallways were long and poorly lit, with flickering lights casting dancing shadows that kept me constantly on edge. The air smelled of a mix of dampness and decay, a constant reminder of how long the place had gone without care. I chose this hotel because it fit my budget, and I deeply regretted not planning better financially. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the hotel itself were alive and watching my every move. Each step echoed through the walls, amplifying the feeling of isolation and abandonment. Trying not to let it shake me, I kept walking towards my room, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. It seemed like invisible eyes were following me, hidden in the shadows and cracks of the walls. The doors of the other rooms were closed, and there were no signs of other guests, increasing the feeling of loneliness. Everything seemed still, except for a slight breeze that made the curtains flutter ominously. The silence was only broken by the occasional sound of distant footsteps, which seemed to come from all directions but never got closer. With each passing moment, my suspicion and discomfort grew, but I was determined not to let fear take over. Arriving at the reception, I was greeted by Don Juan, the hotel owner. He was a middle-aged man with an unsettling smile that never reached his eyes. His eyes seemed to peer into my soul, and his handshake was cold and uncomfortable. Trying to hide my unease, I thanked him for the welcome, but the heavy atmosphere of the place continued to envelop me like a dense and oppressive fog. Don Juan, with his seemingly friendly demeanor, offered me a free meal as a welcoming gesture. At first, I hesitated to accept, but hunger and lack of options made me give in. Sitting in the empty, dimly lit dining room, I watched as he brought the food. The smell was peculiar, different from anything I had ever experienced. Each bite increased my discomfort, but I decided not to be rude and finished the meal. As we ate, Don Juan asked me many questions about my trip and my plans in Mexico. His eyes were fixed on me throughout the conversation, only heightening my sense of unease. With each answer I gave, I felt as if I were being meticulously analyzed. His excessive hospitality began to seem forced and sinister, but I tried to stay calm and not show the growing fear in my chest. The meal that Don Juan served was unlike anything I had ever tasted before. The spices were exotic, and the flavor had a metallic note that made me uncomfortable. As I chewed, a chill ran down my spine, as if something were terribly wrong. However, determined to experience Mexican culture without prejudice, I continued to eat, trying to ignore the growing feeling of nausea in my stomach. With each bite, the texture of the food became stranger, almost rubbery. I began to wonder what kind of meat was being served. The taste was so peculiar that my mind couldn't help but imagine the worst. Looking at Don Juan, I saw that he was watching me with an almost predatory look, which only increased my suspicion that something was very wrong there. But still, I continued to eat, forcing a smile that didn't reflect my true state of mind. After the meal, I thanked Don Juan and returned to my room, feeling an increasing discomfort. My stomach churned, and the feeling of having ingested something unknown and potentially dangerous wouldn't leave me. Lying in bed, I kept thinking about the strangeness of the food and Don Juan's unsettling behavior. The unease grew, and I began to deeply regret having accepted that meal without questioning its origin. That night, sleeping was an impossible task. Every sound in the hallway seemed amplified, echoing through the walls and creating a sense of constant vigilance. I heard heavy, dragging footsteps, creaking doors, and indecipherable whispers that seemed to come from all sides. The feeling of being watched intensified, making the environment even more oppressive and terrifying. My mind couldn't shut down, replaying every detail of the strange meal and Don Juan's unsettling behavior. Lying in bed, every shadow in the room seemed to move of its own will, creating distorted shapes that fueled my paranoia. The air was dense, filled with a strange smell that seemed to cling to my skin. I tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but insomnia kept me alert. The feeling of regret for choosing that hotel and not planning better financially tormented me with each passing minute. The silence was frequently interrupted by inexplicable noises that made my heart race. At one point, I heard something like a distant moan, which made me get up and check the door, only to find the hallway empty and plunged into darkness. The night seemed endless, and I began to question my sanity. Each second dragged on, and fear rooted itself deeply within me, making me increasingly convinced that something terrible was lurking. At dawn, I decided I needed to understand better this place that so disturbed me. I left the room and began to explore the hotel, driven by an uneasy curiosity. The poorly lit hallways seemed to stretch infinitely, with many locked doors that further aroused my suspicion. Each closed door was a mystery, and the desire to discover what they grew with each step. While walking through the hallways, I discovered a forbidden basement, locked with a heavy, rusty padlock. The sight of this basement awakened a sense of dread, but also an uncontrollable need to uncover its secrets. The presence of this dark place heightened the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. The smell of mold and decay was stronger there, and the darkness seemed even denser and more suffocating. I decided to continue my exploration, despite the growing sense of danger. I discovered abandoned rooms, filled with old, dusty furniture, as if no one had entered them for years. With each discovery, the feeling that something terrible was hidden in that hotel grew stronger. My mind was constantly on alert, and every unexpected sound or shadow made my heart race. The exploration only increased my fear and suspicion, but I knew I had to continue. While exploring the hotel, I finally encountered other guests. They seemed exhausted and disheartened, as if their very energy had been drained. Their skin was pale, and their gazes empty, as if they were trapped in a state of apathy. The interactions were brief and strange, with monosyllabic answers and little desire to converse. The sense of something sinister in the air intensified with each encounter. Trying to start a conversation, I noticed that many avoided talking about their experiences in the hotel. There was an atmosphere of fear and distrust, as if they were aware of something I had yet to discover. One guest, in particular, looked at me with wide eyes and murmured something about not trusting anyone before quickly walking away. The oppression of the environment seemed to affect everyone, creating an atmosphere of silent despair. Each guest I met seemed more tired and beaten than the last. There was an invisible weight that seemed to crush any hope or vitality. These interactions increased my paranoia and fear, reinforcing the feeling that something very wrong was happening in that place. With each moment, the reality of the hotel became clearer. I was trapped in a place of terror, surrounded by people who, like me, were at the mercy of an unknown evil. While exploring the hotel grounds, I stumbled upon a hidden garbage dump behind the building. The nauseating smell of decomposition was almost unbearable, and my curiosity was immediately replaced by a profound sense of dread. Among the piles of trash and food scraps, something caught my eye and made my blood run cold. There, mixed with the garbage, were human remains, fragments of bones, and decomposed flesh. Frozen by the horror of the discovery, my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Every detail imprinted itself on my memory, the pieces of bodies, the bloodstains, and the casual way they were thrown among the food scraps. The reality of the situation hit me hard, and I realized that my stay at the hotel was much more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. Despair took over me, and my heart pounded uncontrollably. I tried to stay calm and quietly retreated from the dump, but the image of those human remains wouldn't leave my mind. Everything began to make sense: the strange food, the apathetic guests, the nighttime noises. It was evident that something monstrous was happening there, and I needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. The need to escape that nightmare increased, but I knew I had to act cautiously not to raise suspicions. Shocked by the discovery, I returned to the hotel trying to appear calm, but inside, my fear grew by the second. The images of the human remains mixed with the trash were etched in my mind, and I began to connect the dots. The suspicious food, the strange guests, the inexplicable noises at night, everything pointed to something terrible and macabre. My heart raced as I tried to formulate a plan of escape. I decided I needed to leave that place immediately. I waited until nightfall when the movement in the hotel diminished. With silent steps, I went to the front door, only to find it locked. I tried several emergency exits, but all were blocked or sealed. Despair began to take hold of me. It was as if the hotel were a prison, and I was trapped in its clutches. Each attempt to escape only increased my sense of helplessness. As I walked through the hallways, trying to stay calm, I found other guests who seemed as apathetic as before. I asked one of them about the exits, but he only mumbled something incoherent before walking away. Panic began to set in. I was trapped in that nightmare with no apparent way out. Doubts began to torment me. Did all the guests know what was happening? Were they being forced to participate in something horrible? The paranoia increased, and I felt that I needed to be careful with every word and action. My investigation led me to the hotel's basement, a place that until then seemed inaccessible. With a growing sense of dread, I found a way to open the rusty padlock blocking the entrance. I descended the creaking stairs and plunged into dense, suffocating darkness. The air was heavy with the metallic smell of blood, and the humidity made the walls seem alive. My heart pounded uncontrollably as I advanced, fearing what I might find. Illuminating the basement with my phone's flashlight, a terrifying scene unfolded before me. In one corner were blood-stained kitchen utensils and parts of human bodies grotesquely scattered. The sight was so shocking that for a moment, I was paralyzed with horror. Every detail of that macabre scene imprinted itself on my mind, making it impossible to ignore the terrible reality I had discovered. It was clear that the hotel was the scene of acts of cannibalism. The revelation was a devastating blow. The sense of safety I tried to maintain completely crumbled, leaving only pure fear and hopelessness. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer and needed to leave before being discovered. But at the same time, the knowledge of this horror forced me to think about how to reveal the truth and save other potential guests. The dilemma consumed me, but I knew my priority was my own survival. While investigating the basement, a cold, malevolent presence began to manifest around me. The air seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, and unintelligible whispers echoed through the dark environment like voices from another world. The shadows on the walls seemed to move independently, assuming distorted and threatening shapes. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the fear I felt reached a new level of terror. In a dark corner, I sensed a presence that seemed almost tangible. A shadowy figure formed in the gloom, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. My entire body froze with fear, and I couldn't look away. The whispers turned into screams of agony, and my mind was on the verge of collapse. I knew I was facing something beyond human comprehension, an entity that seemed to feed on the fear and pain of the living. The malevolent presence began to slowly approach, and my survival instinct finally pushed me to move. I ran through the basement, trying to escape the invisible claws that seemed to want to trap me there forever. Each step was accompanied by a sinister echo, as if being pursued by an army of vengeful spirits. I managed to climb the stairs and exit the basement, but the feeling of being followed never left me. The experience left me terrified and convinced that I needed to leave that hotel immediately before it was too late. Determined to investigate further, I returned to the garbage dump under the cover of night. The darkness seemed even denser, and the silence more oppressive. When I arrived, the scene was more disturbing than before. To my horror, I found wild dogs devouring human remains mixed with trash and food. The sight of the animals tearing flesh and gnawing on human bones confirmed my worst fears. The hotel was a true hell on earth. The dogs noticed me and, for a moment, froze their actions, staring at me with hungry eyes. My breath caught in my throat, and I knew any movement could be fatal. Slowly, I retreated, trying not to draw more attention than I already had. The image of the dogs feeding on human remains was etched in my mind, and the certainty that I needed to leave there solidified even more. I returned to my room, trying to stay calm and not raise suspicions. Every sound, every movement in the hotel seemed amplified, as if everyone were aware of my escape plan. I knew I needed to be meticulous and discreet to escape this nightmare. The constant presence of the dogs outside served as a brutal reminder of the urgency of the situation. There was no time to waste. I needed to find a way to escape before becoming the next victim. When midnight finally came, I decided it was time to attempt an escape. With a backpack on my back, I silently opened the room door and ventured through the dark hotel hallways. Each step was carefully calculated not to make noise. The fear of being caught made my heart beat uncontrollably. I tiptoed, feeling the night's chill run down my spine. As I approached the back exit, where supplies were delivered, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of me. Juan was standing in the middle of the hallway, his face illuminated by the dim light of a flickering lamp. His unsettling smile turned into a menacing expression. He knew what I was trying to do and had no intention of letting me leave. I tried to retreat, but it was too late. He blocked my only escape route. "Did you really think you could escape?" His voice was a cold whisper that echoed through the hallway. Fear took over me, and my whole body trembled. I tried to argue, desperately seeking a way to escape this situation, but Juan was not willing to negotiate. His intentions were clear, and the reality of my situation became even more terrifying. I was trapped, and the only way out seemed to be to fight for my life. The confrontation with Juan was instant and loaded with tension. His eyes gleamed with a mix of cruelty and sadistic pleasure. "You won't leave here alive," he said, slowly advancing towards me. My heart was beating so fast I could barely think. I knew I needed to do something quickly, or my fate would be sealed. I tried to stay calm, looking for a way to escape this desperate situation. "It doesn't have to be this way," I tried to argue, my voice trembling with fear. "I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone what I saw here." But Juan just laughed, a cold sound devoid of any humanity. "You've seen too much," he replied, his voice a cold whisper that seemed to cut through the air. His hands clenched into fists, and the hallway seemed to shrink around me, the shadows closing in like a shroud of despair. In a moment of desperation, I threw my backpack at him, hoping to distract him. Taking advantage of the split second of hesitation, I ran down the hallway towards the back exit. Juan's footsteps sounded heavy behind me, getting closer. The hallway seemed endless, and the fear of being captured fueled my frantic run. I knew this was my only chance to escape and survive. In a moment of utter desperation, I managed to break free from Juan and ran towards the exit. The narrow, dark hallways seemed endless as I advanced, each step echoing like a scream of terror. I felt Juan's presence right behind me, his heavy, threatening footsteps. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, pushing me to keep running even as my lungs burned and my legs began to falter. At each corner I turned, I hoped to find an exit, but the hotel's corridors seemed to stretch into an endless labyrinth. The shadows on the walls moved menacingly, as if alive and trying to stop me. My heart pounded uncontrollably, and the fear of being captured spurred me to run even faster. The sound of Juan's footsteps grew closer, and I knew I had to find an exit quickly or it would be the end. Finally, I spotted a slightly ajar door leading to the street. With a final burst of energy, I sprinted toward it, feeling a glimmer of hope. I pushed the door open with all my strength and dashed outside, the cool night air hitting my face. I didn't stop running, nor did I look back, fearing Juan might be right behind me. The dark streets of the city became my new labyrinth, but at least I was out of the hotel. The race for my life continued, and I knew I needed to find help before it was too late. I ran through the dark, deserted streets of the city, every step filled with desperation and fear. The dim streetlights cast distorted shadows, and my heart hammered in my chest as I searched for a safe place. Every corner seemed like a new challenge, and the feeling of being pursued never left me. The sound of my own footsteps echoed off the walls, and every noise seemed amplified by the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My lungs burned, and my legs were exhausted, but I couldn't stop. Every time I looked back, I feared seeing Juan emerging from the shadows, ready to capture me. The city, which once seemed vibrant and welcoming, now felt like a dark and threatening maze. There was no time to think, only to act, driven by pure survival instinct. Finally, I spotted a police station. My last hope. I ran toward the entrance, practically bursting through the door in my desperation. Inside, the fluorescent light felt almost surreal after the darkness of the streets. Gasping for breath and terrified, I began to plead for help, trying to explain my story. However, my limited Spanish made communication extremely difficult. The words came out fragmented and confused, while the police officers looked at me with skepticism. Ayuda. Necesito ayuda. I repeated, trying to form sentences that explained the situation. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly struggling to grasp the gravity of what I was saying. The language barrier was almost insurmountable, and the fear of not being understood only heightened my desperation. They tried to calm me down, but I knew I needed to make them understand quickly before Don Juan found me. With frantic gestures and fragmented words, I managed to convey the essence of the horror I had witnessed. Hotel. Don Juan, corpses, cannibalism. Gradually, the police began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. One of them picked up the phone to call for backup, while another tried to get more details. The uncertainty in their eyes made me uneasy, but I knew this was my only chance to survive and expose the horrors of the hotel. The police, still reluctant, decided to investigate the hotel. I was placed in the back of a patrol car, and we drove through the dark streets of the city. The fear of encountering Don Juan again made me tremble, but the presence of the police gave me a sliver of hope. When we arrived at the hotel, the place seemed even more sinister under the police flashlights. Every shadow seemed to hide even more terrible secrets. As the officers advanced through the dark hallways, I overheard conversations that made me alert. Comments about previous reports from people who had managed to escape the hotel but whose stories were never taken seriously. This detail sent a chill down my spine, knowing that police negligence had allowed Don Juan to continue his atrocities. This time, however, the police decided to investigate thoroughly due to my insistence and the evident terror in my voice and expression. We descended the stairs to the basement, and what we found confirmed all my worst fears. Blood-stained kitchen utensils, grotesquely scattered human remains, and a smell of death permeating the air. The officers were horrified by the scene, their expressions of disbelief and fear reflecting the terror I felt. Then we witnessed something even more disturbing, shadows moving on their own and unintelligible whispers echoing through the space, as if the spirits of the dead were present, witnessing our macabre discovery. The confirmation of the hotel's horrors was finally in front of the incredulous eyes of the police. The police, shocked by the discovery, quickly took action to rescue the remaining guests from the hotel. The previously silent corridors were now filled with activity, with officers going door to door searching for survivors. Many guests were in shock, their minds and bodies marked by the terror they had endured. Every pale face and vacant stare was a mute testimony to the horrors they had suffered. Medics were urgently called to provide immediate assistance. Some guests were so debilitated they could barely move, requiring immediate aid to be taken out of the hotel. The atmosphere was one of urgency and despair, with screams of fear and crying echoing through the hallways. The feeling of relief upon seeing the police was palpable, but mixed with deep trauma that would not easily be erased. The feeling of relief upon seeing the police was palpable, but mixed with deep trauma that would not easily be erased. Each person taken out carried deep scars, and I knew many would never be the same. Seeing the police finally take action brought a sense of delayed justice, but the price paid by everyone who had suffered there was immeasurable. Don Juan was finally found and arrested by the police. His calm and indifferent expression contrasted with the horrors he had perpetrated. As he was taken away in handcuffs, he maintained that unsettling smile that had so disturbed me. Don Juan's arrest brought a sense of justice, but it did not erase the traumas experienced. His calm and indifferent expression, even as he revealed details of his crimes, made it clear that he was a predator without conscience. I knew that despite being imprisoned, the scars left by his actions would remain with his victims forever, including myself. During the interrogation, Don Juan made revelations that chilled everyone present to the bone. He confessed that the hotel was just a small part of a larger network of cannibalism, human trafficking, and witchcraft spread across various cities. His words were laden with disturbing coldness as he described how this organization operated in the shadows, preying on tourists and vulnerable people. If you have ever experienced something terrifying or have a scary story to share, leave a comment. We want to hear your stories and create a community. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to keep hearing more spine-chilling stories. Your participation is crucial for us to continue bringing impactful content.